virtually. Usually we do ask for a $10 suggested donation at the door, but since we can't do that, you can go to the Outer Spaces website and go to their stream tab. And then there you can donate here to help pay for the production and the artist. And you can see what other stream drives are on there. I know And How is also doing a drive. So what that means is that artists will come here kind of like how I am, get to perform and do a live stream like this, and then have it uploaded to YouTube later so everybody can enjoy the art, because art is something that's really essential right now. At least I believe so. Okay, so we're going to start off with Renee leading us in a land acknowledgement.
Good evening to everyone. My name is Renee Sans Souci. I'm a member of the Omaha tribe of Nebraska. And this evening here on Nite Caps, I'm going to read a land acknowledgement. And I'm going to begin by reading this part of it first, about what land acknowledgements are. Land acknowledgements are formal statements that recognize and honor Indigenous peoples and their ongoing relationships with the land on which we live, learn, and work. They demonstrate respect for Native people and their histories. They counter the erasure of Indigenous peoples' histories and culture. And they voice the truth about Native American history at present. Land acknowledgements are an essential part of building and maintaining good relationships with Native communities. So this is how this one would read. We acknowledge that the land that we are standing on, that we are living on, is the homelands, past, present, and future of the Pawnee, Uere, Nutachi, UmoNhoN or Omaha, Dakota, Lakota, Hinono Aino, Ka, Tsitsista, and Sotahe peoples, as well as those of the relocated Ho-Chunk, Nimahau, Haki, and Bahohe peoples. We acknowledge that this land where we are was a part of the people here that were here where Nebraska is currently. It's the site of many shared resources of the tribes that were named. And we are committed to continuing the practice of gathering and sharing with Indigenous people and others. And in a general way, I wanted to acknowledge that oftentimes when we're stating land acknowledgements, it depends on who's reading it, what perspective and so forth. Oftentimes what Native peoples, what their responses about land acknowledgements is that they're saying that's not enough. If you really want to, make reparations with land acknowledgements and so forth, give us back our land. That's the general response across the nation. So
thank you for leading us in that and giving us a background education on that too, for those of us who didn't know what a land acknowledgement was, or even the fact that that's not enough right now.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, so thank you so much. Okay, awesome. So we will get into some introductions now. Again, I'm Maria Corpuz, and I am the host of tonight. There's a little zoom in on me. We love that. But I am here tonight and wanted to talk about this because one of my really good friends passed away about a month ago, and it's really hard to process that and all the emotions that come with it without being in the community of love that I'm so used to around him. So that's why I wanted to talk about different feelings and emotions and learn from you guys how to help heal myself and everybody else who's interested. So Renee, since you started, you can kind of keep starting here with a little bit more of an introduction. And then with your introductions, if you could also tell me any mantras or affirmations that you guys use, I would love that.
Okay. I'll speak in my language first, and then I'll share with in English. Ebelite wiblotamek umaha ijaje wiwitate shonge khube wa wahe ijaje wiwitate Renee Sans Souci umaha wa ubli. And I just said, let me introduce myself. My Omaha name is Sacred Horsewoman. My English name is Renee Sans Souci, and I am an Omaha woman. And I think every day I just start out when I wake up is just by saying thank you, and I'll say it in the Omaha language. I'll say Wakanda Wiblaha, which means thank you, Creator, And then I'll go on and just say, Idado Gruba Udashkache. Everything you do is good. So it's acknowledging the Creator and everything. And then putting forth my intention about how I want the day to be. So, casting out my energy and saying, today's going to be a good day, no matter what, We never know what we're going to be experiencing every day. So it's like, I guess it's like a prayer or a good thought that you're putting out there, and it surrounds you. Then that's how I feel about it. So
thank you. Gave me chills. Thank you. All right, Connie.
Well, my name is Connie Urbongo, and I am a therapist in the Omaha and Iowa community. I also do like life coaching and then spiritual healing through like non-traditional intuitive practices. As for mantras, I think I always pick a mantra once a year, like as a theme. I don't know why or when I started doing that. But one that I think I've used throughout my like high school and college and like obviously like present adult life is trust the mess. I saw it once in this book and it really resonated with me. It was like a creative like journaling practice, like you could do art in it. And so I think anytime that like things get messy, I always just say like trust the mess, or like I know myself better than, like I always can overcome something. So that would be probably like, a mantra that I stand firm with. As for like meditation practices, I mean, I love this stuff. So I do wake up. First thing I say is thank you, because I didn't have to wake up. So every day you wake up is a good one. And then I actually do a lot of like manifestation work in the morning. So I have it's like an autoplay of like what I'm trying to manifest, and I listen to it while I get ready and I look at my vision board. And so I do that in the morning with power posing, and then at nighttime, yes, love power posing. And then at nighttime, I do more of like affirmations with anything that I need to work on. So those change and evolve. And then I like to I do my gratitude at night. And then I like to set an intention for what I want clarity on for the next day. This is a little different, but yeah, so that's like my bread and butter. I could go on for days about that kind of stuff. So I'll stop there for now.
I love the thought of asking the universe or gods or whoever you believe in to like provide more clarity. Mm-hmm. I like that thought. All right, Catherine.
Hi, my name is Catherine McCombs. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a community activist as well as the program partner for community engagement with inclusive communities. two mantras. I find a lot that when we are moving through as people with marginalized identities or oppressed and repressed identities, I find that I am constantly dealing with a lot of my own internalized oppression. And so one thing that I find has given me a lot of grace is to repeat when I find, like when I am trying to hold myself or diminish myself in certain ways, then I repeat to myself, I am multitudes, and give myself the grace to step fully into all of my identities, even if I've been taught that they should give me stress, and that I'm an imperfect being on an imperfect journey. And so to remind myself that I can, and we live in an imperfect world. So if I'm trying to be an advocate for people, I still have to navigate systems. And so to acknowledge where I have to interact with these systems and still can be true to the things that I believe in, I give myself that grace by telling myself that I am multitudes. And then something that I offer to everyone who does this work is to, again, acknowledge that we can interact with each other in the ways that envision a world that we want to live in while still navigating the world as it is right now.
Yes, multitudes. I guess I could share mine. Recently, it has been that I'm essential. I learned a pattern in myself that I see myself as disposable. So trying to reframe that brain network and pattern in myself to remind myself that I'm essential. And it's funny, I don't know if this has ever happened to you guys, but since I had been doing it so much, there was one day that my mantra just like woke me up as my alarm clock. I like woke up and was like, I am essential. And I was like, oh, that has never happened to me before, but I love it. How do I program myself to always think that? Awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here with me virtually, and for all the time you've put into just preparing for this. I already have gotten the chills so many times. So I totally forgot to get myself like Kleenex and tissues for this one too. So we'll just be throwing those over there. Anyhow, okay. So the first question that I kind of wanted to start out with, that I think a lot of people that I've talked to have been struggling with this, is how do you guys fill your own cup right now when so many people need our healing energy as community members, or just other people in general? I have the habit of throwing my energy out. And then all of a sudden I look back and I'm like, I have no energy left to give. And now it's going to take me weeks or however long to even like refill to half. So I guess, how have you guys learned to fill your own cup?
Let's not all fight. I can go first. Honestly, I am a total extrovert, so I actually fill my cup up by being with people. But this has been a struggle, and I admit this to my clients because I feel depleted essentially from, some of my favorite love languages, which is quality of time. And so I've done a lot of inner work to refill, which would be like through meditation, and like I increase like my yoga practice, like slower flow style yoga, and those kind of things. I love my bubble baths, but really I think just like taking some time for myself, and then that allows me to pour into my clients. Because you have to find a way to decompress it. So any kind of way, whether it's like working out or like actively or internally through the mind, letting go of whatever it is that's stressing me out, and then I can give again.
Thanks, Connie.
Yeah, I would say, like, in the past, since this year began, so many things have been happening, and I feel bombarded, especially after COVID set in and I was home. I thought I would have more time to work on the projects I had, and it just seemed like I've been bombarded ever since, constantly. And without any breaks really. But I've had to set my boundaries in what I need to do for myself. If I'm completely drained, then I have to take a day or two, a day or two to decompress and to restore my energy. And, when you're going through so much, whatever that may be, each one of us is so different. We're like, but I think each one of us are probably very sensitive in, how we carry out our work. When you're doing so much, then I always let people know that I work with, that come to me for help and so forth, is that you really do have to take care of yourself first before you can be giving to others. So by doing so, I do my meditations, I do my prayers, and if I have the opportunity, I'll go into ceremony as well. So our way of healing is often through our ceremonial practices. So that's one way that I come out of, any kind of stressful, I guess incidents or activities, events, whatever you want to call them.
And have you been able to attend any of those ceremonies with the pandemic happening, or how have you guys adjusted to that?
Well, when we do our ceremonies, generally there's not a whole lot of us that are coming together at once. So we do stay within that realm of, of a small gathering, and we do our ceremonies together. But it's not like, we're not like hugging each other and touching each other. We respect that we do keep our distance, and we do talk to one another. We're not like shaking hands and, doing all the things that we would normally do when we see one. It's been possible, it has worked. So
that's beautiful that you guys are able to adapt like that. All right.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I deferred to Renee and Connie because I am quite terrible at this. If full disclosure and with authenticity, I come from a long line of people who are, my mom's family were immigrants and my dad's family is Black. And so I think with both of those, as well as I venture to speak outside of my own lived experience to say that a lot of people who experience marginalization don't prioritize mental health. And so I am unlearning how to do that. So right now I'm a chronic overfunctioner, which is a Brene Brown reference, which means that in times of crisis, like I am one of the people who's like, all right, let's organize who needs what, who needs this. And so lately my friend has been kind of joking that I have these sessions where I just like power down, which means I'm still too amped to sleep, but I'm like, I just like go comatose for a second until the next new thing. So, in the spirit of full disclosure, I'm terrible at this, and I have yet to master that at my ripe old 30-year-old age.
Great, because I'm working on that too. To kind of go back again with what Renee said about setting boundaries for yourself, especially with us who are givers of our energy and so quick to give our energy away. I mean, like, how do you start to learn where your boundaries are and have the words to communicate those to other people?
Honestly, I think it's trial and error. Mm-hmm. First of all, I mean, some things you're taught, like we are taught from a young age how to create boundaries. And so if they are healthy boundaries, then we start with that. But if they're not, and no one ever teaches us these boundaries, then we like carry on our lives with unhealthy boundaries. And then we push that onto other people, and we attract like-minded people with poor boundaries like us, or people who want to step into our boundaries. But honestly, I think there's like a lot of my boundaries that I've learned to set in my current life that have helped me either recharge or create meaning in my life or meaningful relationships have been because I once didn't. And then I realized that needed to be in place in order to take care of myself or my heart, or like just kind of like facilitate or create a safe space for myself.
I think for me, it's been trial and error, as Connie said. That's really perfect. I think women and femme identifying folks are conditioned to give so much into the world without setting those boundaries. And so for me, it's been about like, does this deserve my energy? And like really centering myself, right? As you said, Maria, like being essential. Like if you believe that you're essential, then you operate from, does this deserve my energy more than I do? Is this the best use of my energy for the things that I believe in? And if we approach our work as though we are all liberation minded folks with best intentions, then you also deserve to, not to be selfish, but to center yourself. In your approach and in the things that will zap energy from you, because I think that that's also revolutionary, right? To believe that you deserve to make it to tomorrow, to keep fighting and to keep making the world a better place. And so I've had to center myself while not becoming self-centered.
Centering yourself while not being selfish. I feel like that's a huge theme. So many times we feel selfish for doing that. And it's like this capitalistic go system that we live in. That's just like more time at work, more money in the bank, go. You need to be sprawling out into 20 different avenues.
Yep.
And then the center of yourself is just like stretched too thin.
I think what I can say about how we do that, how I learned was after I got divorced, after being married for 15 years and having 4 children, and everything I thought was going to be there was no longer there in place. And I went into therapy right away. And through therapy and through like Al-Anon meetings, I began to realize that I had no boundaries. That all throughout my life, into my 40s, I was completely unaware that I could set boundaries, healthy boundaries. No one taught me that. And this is a part of intergenerational trauma that we learn, that we're supposed to be like enmeshed. We're supposed to be giving, so giving that, we let people trample us. And when I realized that I had been doing this all my life, and allowing people to, continually take advantage of me or, to harm me, then I said, okay, I recognize now that this is what I have been conditioned to believe about myself. And just like what you were saying, Maria, about, you're, telling yourself that you're essential. It's like undoing a lot of that thought process that we've been conditioned to believe about ourselves, especially as women. That's what I had to confront, first of all, and confront myself and realize, wow, I didn't know. But now that I know, how do I go about doing this? And when you do set boundaries with people, initially, especially if it's your family or, close friends and so forth, they get mad, and they don't like that, that you're changing, they'll say that to you, you've changed. And you can say, yes, I have, I'm going to take care of myself. That was kind of like what I had to go through, my own process of healing. And since then, I've been able to set healthy boundaries with people and, in order to establish respect, because that's what we're really dealing with, is respect or disrespect.
Yeah, very well put. And it's funny, like at first when you realize these patterns, at least for me, I was like, okay, I can address this and then I'm going to have this fixed right away. But it's not that way. Especially when we've acted in these patterns for our entire life, then to look back and say, wow, I was wrong for 20 plus years, 30 plus years, 40 plus years. Okay, take a few steps back, a step forward, a few steps back, it just flows. And you just kind of I've learned to be patient with the entire process. Like, I'm not going to feel essential 24/7 right away off the bat. Oh, we have a question. Yes, I love questions. Okay, so this is kind of jumping up a little bit. Okay, can we explain a little bit about generational trauma and current experience trauma?
Well, I can speak from that in that way that, you know, I've been trained for a number of years. You know, I'm not like a therapist, but as a community advocate and so forth. Went through extensive training in what they call intergenerational trauma. And uh, what I can say about that as a Native woman, you know, someone who has experienced trauma throughout my life in many different forms, uh, one of the things I had to come to terms with as I grew older and more understanding of what was happening, I had to go through an educational process for myself in order to understand why this was happening. And once I did that, then I could look back into my own family's history and see where, you know, where did this actually begin? You know, I could almost pinpoint it. You know, I could pinpoint it to the year 1804. You know, 1804 is when our tribe was impacted by smallpox. Smallpox decimated us and went through our tribe I think about 4 times. We were a healthy, strong tribe in, you know, numbering like in the 20,000s. We were very powerful. But once smallpox came in, it decimated us and took our numbers down to, some say 1,100, some say 300, you know, and we could never recover. We didn't recover for a long time. We're still recovering. As a result, you know, from that loss, that was, like I said, began in 1804. Then a series of things happened from that point on. We were in a weakened state, and the United States government then established all these policies about, you know, and to my tribe, around our tribe, you know, everything that was happening, established these treaties that then we were forced to cede our land. So when we ceded our land, we were, like I said, we were in a weakened state. Then that also was a loss of land. And I'm not talking about, you know, anything small. I'm talking like millions and millions of acres of land that we had to survive on. So loss of land, loss of people first, loss of land, then the policy of removing our children to send them off to boarding school to be educated as to be civilized in the white society. That was another loss for our children, who then came back and were now no longer associated with our tribe in the way that they once were. That also, you know, we didn't flourish like we did before. And we lost our language as a result because they were forced to speak English. Generational trauma has impacted my people for about 200 plus years. And to this day, all these losses, from loss of land, loss of people, loss of language, and then to add on to it, like insult, what do they call it? Insult to injury. We were forced to give up our spirituality, our spiritual practices. They became illegal for us to practice up until 1978. So we didn't have that to sustain us. So our sustainability practices were no longer in place to help us stay healthy and strong. And we were impacted by the introduction of alcohol. People that came to us were also abusing our women and abused our children. So all of this over, you know, the last 2 centuries has definitely left its impact upon my people and then my family. So once I could see that, I could say, oh, this is what happened to us. This is what happened to my family. My mom and, you know, her family, you know, her grandparents and so forth were all sent to boarding school. So I'm the first generation that has not been sent off to boarding school. I'm a first generation that has said, no, I'm not going to allow alcohol or any kind of violence in my home. I'm a first generation to return back to our ceremonies and to pick them up and to put them into practice for my family, for our well-being. So to understand the impacts of intergenerational trauma, you really have to look at your history. How did you come here to this land? What happened to your ancestors that, you know, you were either forced to come here or you were brought here, you know, maybe, you know, through means that, you know, again, weren't quite up to you. But then again, some came here willingly and put aside their identities and, you know, stopped looking at their history. Maybe it was too painful.
Yeah, so Connie, kind of going off of that, as a mental health therapist, how is processing between the two, how does that work? Is there different coping processing methods to processing generational trauma versus processing firsthand trauma?
I think it just depends on where the person is in their journey. Because if you have to start with something, right? So maybe from a therapeutic perspective, you're going to say, I'm going to come to you to talk about violence that has gone on in my family, and how that's impacting my relationship with somebody else. But that, like, conflict that you came with was something that was learned through your family. So it's really like in EMDR, they talk about like all roads lead to Rome. Like everything is really actually kind of intertwined and connected. So yes, I can isolate it to today, my problem now, but the reality of the situation is you are like, we are these souls, these spirits that are a bigger picture. I mean, I've talked about this before, like when your mom has you, you are, or when your mom is pregnant, or your grandma was pregnant, she was carrying you. Just kind of weird because your mom had all her eggs, grandma had all, so you technically are also taking on familiar stuff. Because I mean, if, I'm not a doctor here, but you know, like medically, like we have common like high blood pressure, diabetes. You'll see that like in the Black community. And then you'll see like genetically things passed down through like our identity and our race. And so I don't think you can actually really separate them for the sake of like what came first, the chicken or the egg, because they're so intertwined together. But at the same time, I think that you can choose to work on them individually. But I think there was something so powerful in what Renee said when she was like, you really need to go back and look at your family history, because that will really actually explain a lot about how we see the world from some circumstances, because we really do learn first from our family's experience. It's almost like you think something's normal in your family and then you go to your friend's house and then they don't do that. Like in my house, I am like loud. My mom's like, I don't understand why you're so loud. And then I go to other people's families' houses. I'm like, I fit in here. Like everybody is loud. And so the world is like normalized and like taken in from so many perspectives and purposes. And I think, you know, what you said was like the whole, like, I'm essential, you know, part of it. And you're like, I tell myself this and I'm reprogramming myself. But the reality is that as a child, somewhere along the road, you got an idea that you weren't essential. And maybe it came from home or maybe it came from school, but you like have to like dissect those little moments and they give you more clarity. And I think about like my own work, my own personal work that I've done about my own identity. I had to start with me. Like I had to start with who I present to be today. And once I had a little bit of that, it was easier to unpack things and talk to my parents or understand family issues. And there's just this overall bigger component about who I am because of the life experiences that I have, that I have participated in. And some of those were intentional and some of those were not intentional. And so I think sometimes it's hard when you like think of yourself as like a confident person, right? And then you find out you have like a negative belief, like I'm not essential or I'm not enough or I'm not worthy. And you wonder where that came from. But the reality is it came from like the past. It came from those other senses, and they lay so dormant within us sometimes that it's the younger versions of ourselves that need to be healed. And the common misconception is that, like, for example, like the work that I'm doing now, like the 30-year-old does not have the problem. It's 5-year-old version of myself. Okay. And so if it's the 5-year-old's problem, then I've been like, okay, let me talk to this 5-year-old and be like, get it together. Like, that's how in my head, I'm like, get it together. We've got things to do, an empire built, and I'm like, come on, let's go, 5-year-old. But the reality is if there was a 5-year-old who like took in that trauma and had something bad happen to them or something, impacted their world negatively, you wouldn't be like, okay, 5-year-old, let's go. We got to build it. We got things to do. You would sit that 5-year-old down and say, okay, now what are you feeling? And then you would say, and so I think that's what's so powerful about certain therapy dynamics when you're working with trauma or like, especially like EMDR, because you're going back to that 5-year-old and you're speaking to that 5-year-old and you're clearing the trauma, like from the body that has been taken from the 5-year-old. And it's like, if you heal the brain and you heal the mind, it also starts to heal the body. And it's almost like why people say like, when you work through things, like you carry yourself a different way or your energy comes out a different way. So I don't know. I don't know if that answered that question.
Absolutely. So many beautiful points made there. It kind of just made me also, remind myself when I started to recognize these patterns in me and the string that from which they came down to me, I was able to find more grace, not only for myself, but for my family.
Yes.
And it's like, oh, it's okay that my grandma says this because like that's what she learned and that's her coping mechanism. And how cool is it that it stops with me? And I'm going to try my hardest to break that pattern that has for generations hurt the women or men in my family.
I think what's powerful about what you said was when you changed how you felt about yourself, you saw your grandma a different perspective. And you think about when you change how you look at someone else, you then create an energy shift where maybe now grandma can learn from you. Because chances are someone probably never showed grandma how to be there for you at that capacity. And so then you can even, like, people often think about like healing trauma forward, but it can also be healed from a backwards position because that love is like sent and spread and shared. And it gives also, I think, you peace within yourself because it's like grandma's trauma is no longer your trauma. And because that's not the case anymore, you can like be lighter and your reaction and response to her is going to be significantly different.
Yes. Catherine, coming from being multifaceted and coming from two kind of different cultures, how have you seen, I guess, the difference of each culture kind of working through that internal oppression?
So that's a really interesting question because there's so many more similarities. So being an immigrant versus like being a person of Black descent here in America, right, where we have I have always struggled with a sense of disconnection. And part of that, I think, was the intergenerational trauma of having family that chose to leave, and also having family that was brought here against their will. And the disconnect of trying to assimilate to be the good white, become Americans and leave behind culture. And then the culture clash of, you have been brought here for a specific purpose. You are no longer in that purpose because we've freed you. But in the process of you being brought here and being slaves and being enslaved, we have also taken away all of the connections. So now you live in a land where you are not wanted. And now you have to make do with what you're given. And then to have my white immigrant side assimilate and actively choose. And so in my own life, that's really manifested as this feeling of disconnect. And so I am actually not close to either sides of my family. And so it's interesting, right? Because there's this ancestral feeling of disconnection, whether chosen or forced. And then being a biracial person, identifying as Black, but very much white passing and having a white mother, a sense of like imposter syndrome and disconnection to the Black community that I've really tried to struggle with. And so it's even the way that like our ancestors can manifest personally, which is the conversation that we're having right now. So it's this sense of disconnection that started generations before my ancestors even met, or like to form me, my mom and dad even met to form me, has manifested in a very real way in my life that has become a barrier to development. This is the first year of my life that I've like actively stepped into all of the identities that I hold. And even then, right, there's the imposter syndrome, right? So like I started actively identifying as a Black person, and then, right, tackling all of the privilege rolled up in that statement to be like, I am so white passing that I can choose to identify as Black, and then identifying as Black, wrestling with that privilege, and then starting to identify as queer because I finally was Black enough in my mind, just by existing, to then become the other things of myself. So this is the first year that I have really been able to peel back all of the internalized oppression that manifested, and then to be like, this is who I am. And if people don't like it, because there's gonna be somebody who I am not their cup of tea, and that is okay, because I get to keep it pushing while being as as dynamic as I can be. And I think that's another reason why my mantra is I am multitudes, because I contradict myself all the time. And it has to be okay.
Absolutely. We have a follow-up question for you. Have you personally found a sense of belonging anywhere or with anyone?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is really incredible is the ability to choose. And this is very common in the LGBTQ community, is to find found family. And so I absolutely feel I think part of it too is this idea that like the Black community is a monolith, right? So they either accept you or they don't. But it's really been about finding the Black people and finding other people who affirm my identities. But for me, it was really important for me to identify as Black. And so finding the Black folks that I don't have to fight around my identity with, that it's just, yeah, you're Black. Like, I don't even know why you had to say it. And then going from there, because I deserve to live in those identities fully, and then to have them affirmed by the people around me. Just as we should be doing for our youth as they come out, as they explore their identities. So it's really about finding the people who are like, yeah, you're Black. And as like the operating premise through which we interact. So I absolutely have. And I think that that's just advice for everyone. You deserve to be affirmed. You deserve to have people affirm you in your corner and around you. And if people don't, like, you're not going to be everyone's cup of whiskey. Like, you're not, and that's cool. You just keep it pushing. Thanks. And those are where boundaries come up.
Yes.
Yes.
How do we get to 15 minutes in?
I'm sitting here like, yes. I think a lot of that really, really resonates with my spirit. So I'm like, yes.
What else are you feeling, Connie?
Well, I don't, a lot of what you said just really does resonate with me. Like I'm technically an immigrant. And then, you know, I feel like I really started exploring my identity when I was in college, and I took multicultural, I can never say this right, multiculture
Yes.
into psychology. Okay, well, anyway, so long story short, so I had to do a lot of like identity work, and like I'm raised by two very smart professor parents who, you know, like decided to move our family to America. And I went to, like, they're professors, so they sent us to private education, raised predominantly white like communities, and education for them is like the king thing of every of like the path, I guess. Yeah. And so I like have a personality type that I feel like I just am like join me, and like, you know, engaging and making friends with just like about anyone or anything, I feel like. But I think when I was in college, I like really realized that the world, and I say this to my like teens and a lot of people in their 20s, because I think this is like a lot of where this work comes from, because you start to realize if you don't tell the world who you are, they will immediately tell you. Yep. And so, you know, we moved to America when I was 3 years old. And so, like, you know, if I would talk to some family, sometimes they'd be like, "Oh, you're so American now." You know, "You're so American now." And I'm like, and people would sometimes not even believe that I was born in the Congo because I assimilated so well. But then, like, in the Black community, I would always get like, "Well, you know, you're not Black, you're African." And so, like, I then had to deal with that struggle. And we all know going to predominantly white schools, I'm not white, so I didn't fit into that category.
Right.
And so, and I like feel like that's the work that I've been doing, even like right now, is like figuring out where I fit into the world and how I can best give. And I think, you know, what you touched on about, like, you know, if you tell me who you are, right, you become that. And so when I like recently have been really feeling the weight of like, I can authentically show parts of myself to people, but molding those parts consistently and at the same time, that's an intricate, very challenging dance, because, you know, not all places want to accept all parts of you. And so, but you can't create, you know, you can't create a life, or you can't create a career or anything and truly sit with yourself and be happy about your identity when parts of your identity have to be shut off. And so there's something super freeing in, I get to choose what my identity is, and I'm going to tell you what that identity is. And if it doesn't sit well with you, that's okay. But you can go a different path, or you can like celebrate that with me. And so I don't know, like when you were talking, I was like, yes, because I could talk for hours on this topic, because it's very powerful stuff.
I think what you want to,
very powerful.
I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I hate Zoom because you can't read people's body language. You said something really critical that I just wanted to loop back around with, because I think it fits in really beautifully with Renee. And that's that, like, in the absence of information that people have, they will write your narrative unless you do. Yep. Right. So, and you said that, and you used the word narrative. And I thought that was a really beautiful tie-in to like Renee's work, because she is a poet. You're a poet. And you'll be sharing it with us. And I just thought that was like something that I really wanted to delve back into. And now I'm like, I do this for a living, so now I've taken over Maria's panel. So
take it over.
But like this idea of a life narrative, right? I think is so beautiful. And I'm just interested, especially because I could talk to Connie all day too, but I want to make sure, like, Renee, I want to hear about like the place of narrative in the life story in your work. I think that would be really beautiful.
Narrative. Part of it is, over the centuries, again, we've had so many people telling our story, but their version of our story. So we've had the whitewashed histories that have been repeated over and over. And then again, on our native side, it's always been, we're always the losing party, right? We're always like, you know, they're downtrodden, they're this, they're that.
Yeah.
And when in actuality, what we've had to do, we were forced to adapt. You know, we were forced to assimilate, you know, and that was against our will. And so, you know, when we talk about narrative or we talk about, you know, how I always get that question, how did you become an activist? You know, and I always say, well, I was born into it. You know,
Yes.
I was born
Yes.
into resistance because just we always say our existence is our resistance. Just by me breathing
Yes.
alive is an act of resistance against everything that this country stands for, right? So for me to speak out openly now that I found my voice, you know, I can write about it, I can act it out, I can, you know, there's so many different platforms now that I can speak and say, you know, this is who I am, but this is also, you know, my people, this is my children, because my children are from a different tribe. You know, their dad was Lakota. So my children are Lakota. So here's me being in this place now. I'm an Omaha woman, and now I have to think Lakota. And I want to, you know, because that was the identity they chose for themselves. I gave them that option, you know, when I became a single mother. I said, okay, you can either be Omaha, which I can help you with, or you can be Lakota, and I'll still help you with, you know. And they said, well, we're Lakota. And I said, okay, well then that means I have to immerse myself in the Lakota culture, belief system, even language. And by no means am I a fluent speaker of Lakota, but by being around Lakota people and then taking my children around Lakota people, and we're able to engage in all these different Lakota activities, they're, you know, they feel quite comfortable in being who they are. Because that's, to me, that was my goal as a mother, was like, I want my children to have a different experience than I did. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in a time where, you know, where everything was, I guess you'd say, an upheaval. You know, I grew up during the civil rights movement, you know, in the 60s and 70s. And, you know, I witnessed all the things that were happening in the 70s with the American Indian movement. That had such an impact on me and my identity that I was like, yes, I'm proud to be Native. You know, this is who I am, you know. And as I grew older and began to express who, you know, who I am as a Native woman, as an Omaha woman, I had to find that way to embrace my spirituality. Because like I said, that was illegal, you know, and I didn't grow up with it. My parents were trying to offer us Christianity, and I wasn't having anything of it because I was like, that does not fit. I tried going to church, I tried everything, and I was like, you know what, none of that fits with me. But as soon as I was exposed back to our traditional ways, I felt like I found it. It's here, it's still alive, it's still here. Oh my gosh, you know, I was so thankful, so happy to find that. So I took a path that I guess you'd say nowadays very few people would choose, because it's a path of suffering. But through the suffering now is a way that healing comes about, and we're able to re-engage with our identities and reclaim everything. Reclaim our languages, reclaim our ceremonies, reclaim our identities, and you know, one day hopefully reclaim our land too, you know. So all of those things that are part of us as Native people, it, you know, depending on the tribes, or, you know, tribes, my kids are, you know, two tribes, but then like they identify with one. And I'm fine with that, because I feel like it's important that they do that, you know, for themselves, for their well-being. So the narrative is like, we're not, you know, I'm not comfortable with anyone speaking about my story anymore, you know, and I've had to confront that with different people, especially white males, you know, who, you know, have that privilege, and they want to exercise that, you know, oh, I'm gonna tell your story, and I'm like, no longer, you know, I'm telling my story. So it's a challenge because, you know, the kind of society that we live in renders us invisible. You know, we're dealing with so many different issues. And for me, taking on, you know, I have to choose my battles because otherwise I'm overwhelmed with, you know, there's you know, like I said, bombarded. People want you to go do this and do this and do this. And I'm like, I can't do everything, you know, but I do have certain issues that I focus on.
The narrative is so important, and I'm starting to realize that more. Just this past week was the Philippines Independence Day from the Spaniards, and I went and I told my grandma, who's 93, turns 93 this year, and it was like, Happy Filipino Independence Day, and she's like, it's not July 4th. I was like, well, yeah, we're not talking about the American independence, we're talking about the Filipino independence. She's like, we don't celebrate that, we celebrate 4th of July.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, really? Even in the Philippines? And she said, yeah, we just celebrate 4th of July. Like, all of our educational books were from the U.S.
Oh, wow.
And so it's like, her culture, being Filipino, learned, again, from the white male narrative of what's important to celebrate.
Mm-hmm.
So it's patterns, man. It's also kind of just made me think of... It's also helped me have grace with white folks. Because if our trauma, this is just something that I've been playing with, if our trauma as minorities is generational and lasts and has been passed on, so has the culture of dominance almost. I'm not quite sure. This is like the first time I'm really like speaking this thought out into existence, but it's what they've learned. And if I want people to have grace with me and where I'm at in dealing with breaking down the patterns of my familial ancestral trauma, I also have to learn to give grace to everyone else.
I think I would say yes and to a point, right? Because whereas like our ancestors are learning and unlearning things from a space of less resources, like there's this beautiful thing happening right now, right? Which is this awakening of a lot of people to the plight of particularly Black folks. And I hope that that moves into Indigenous folks as well. But right now we're seeing that trending, right? Black Lives Matter is trending right now. And so it's a yes and situation, right? Like I want to live in a world, my ideal, very liberated world is a world where everyone gives grace. But this world that is very stratified, I have a lot less patience because the other thing is that this has been around for hundreds of years. Yes. And even now where you have like, there are free there's free resources for education. And so it's, yes, everyone deserves grace. And also, there is personal responsibility for undoing. And that is something that we see a lot for like Black and Indigenous and other folks of color. We see a personal onus, like, for instance, with COVID, right? We're seeing a lot of people say, well, Black people should take better care of themselves. And it's like, well, the systems and the structures don't allow for that. We have a public healthcare system, but we also have a public system of disregard for Black and Indigenous lives and other folks of color. And so it's a yes and thing. Yes, everyone deserves grace. And also, there is personal responsibility in all of these things, in all of the systems that we talk about with all of the folks. And I still hold maybe, and this might be me being multitudinous and a little bit problematic, but I still feel like I should hold white folks who have traditionally had more resources to a higher standard. Mm-hmm. And that's my hot take of the night.
I would say like the process that most Native people have been utilizing, you know, in order to, you know, come about healing and, you know, et cetera, especially trauma, intergenerational trauma. the process that we most talk about right now is what we call decolonization.
Mm-hmm.
So a decolonization process is understanding what we have gone through and what we need to do in order to take back, our narratives, take back our healthy ways of living, our traditions, and also the recognizing that what we had gone through was very a paternalistic, chauvinistic training that our men have taken upon themselves now. And some men are beginning to realize that. They're beginning to realize that, oh, wow, this was not a part of our culture, our traditions. And for the women, like myself, we're saying, we once held positions of leadership. We were healers. We were, all these positions that we once held in our tribes. Many of us are saying, you know what, men, you've had your chance, and well, look at it. It's pretty fucked up now. We're taking this back because, we need to see this healing happen in order for us to move forward, in order for us to interact with our, brothers and sisters, our Black African brothers and sisters, our, I'm not comfortable with using the word Latino because that doesn't quite, strike me as the right word. But, I guess for the purposes to say that right now, we could say all these other names that because they're indigenous too. That's how we look at it. But in addition to that, we're looking at, who are the people here? How do we want to interact with them? And how will we help them, but also will they listen? If they don't listen, it might be a very deadly, consequence if they don't begin to listen to us. Not for us. I'm not saying that's for us. I'm saying for their own well-being, because eventually they're going to turn to us and ask anyway. That's what, our people say. So talking about, we always say non-natives, but in a sense, when we're saying non-natives, we're essentially saying somebody who is white, or however you want to phrase that, Caucasian or Euro-American, whatever. So there are some that are coming and saying, we do want to learn and we want to understand and we want to change this, and are really seeking to do that. And others aren't so much, but in time, that's the hope. Because I always feel like there's always hope. We could change what happened, 500 years ago, because someone had brought that up to me on Facebook about, across the country, Columbus statues are coming down, right? And because of that, there's a lot of discussion about, why is that such a problem to have Columbus, being a statue somewhere, and they're not getting it, right? So the question was like, how, what would have, how would this have been different if the people who came to this land had come, in a different way? Well, of course it would have been different. If the people who had come to this land, in a way that was respectful and not with conquest in mind, or as we say, with the doctrine of discovery in hand, things would have been a lot different. There would have been so much more opportunities to learn from one another, rather than coming in and saying, well, this land is, empty. There's people here, but they're all savages. They're not, they're uncivilized. So here they are saying, well, we can take this land, rather than realizing, oh, wow, this land is occupied and here are the people. And, the land that was seen as being empty, those were our gardens, right? Those were our gardens. So, we knew this land so well. We knew how to take care of it. This was our, this was our gift to how we served the Mother Earth. So, and her gifts to us was by providing everything for us to survive. So there was no need for, all, what we see now today. And people don't quite understand that, concept, but this is what we still live with to this day. And that is what they call cognitive dissonance, because our values and our way of life is just run so everything you could think of. It's like converse, contradictory, everything that is going on with this society now. I'm still a traditional Native woman, and I'm taking back my identity, but that's not, according to what the value system that we're living in now. So it's really hard sometimes to try to live this way. And I know that we were going to talk about grief, and part of that grief is that, we've been grieving for a long time. We've been grieving for the loss of land and for the loss of everything, our languages, our spirituality. But like I said, by now acknowledging that grief that we've carried, by seeing the generations suffer, from my own mother, her mother, and so forth. It's like understanding what happened and then coming to myself and to what happened to me, and what I have grieved for a long time. Whether that was, because of the things that happened to me and not having anyone around me to support me, to now of, acknowledging the kind of grief that I do carry, but at the same time, how do I work with that? Well, we do have our ceremonies again that I call upon, I rely on to help me get through the grief and help me process the grief in a way that I can, live and breathe without being bogged down in it. So.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the point on grief. I did really want to get into that. Like you said, some of our cultures have been dealing with grief for decades, centuries. And so other people are now just kind of being exposed to that deep level of grief, of the sense of losing either a sense of normalcy, a loved one, a sense of self. And so figuring out how to act now while processing this grief can seem really intimidating. What would you guys, what advice would you guys have in getting ready for the long haul that we all need to probably be doing right now in today's day and age, to not, kind of going back to what we were talking about before, like not overextend ourselves to process these maybe, I don't want to say negative emotions, but harder emotions, and still be activists and still be helping our community in ways that are beneficial?
I want to jump in kind of with 2 points, because I know that your exploration of this topic is around interpersonal grief. And there's something that I found to be really, really beautiful about processing grief. And I wish that I could cite this source. But it's this idea that one of the reasons we grieve is because, right, we are experiencing a loss. And there's this idea that when we grieve an interpersonal loss, like part of that grief is because this person knows us only in a way that they could know us. And so there's a death of a person and then a loss of a part of ourselves. And that's the grief part. But I think the mirror to that, I'm really interested in the way that things balance out. And so the balance of that is that the person who's passed is still alive, because if part of you lies with that person as they go, then part of that person stays with you. And so these people live on through us, through our memories of them, through us carrying their stories, through us and how we choose to integrate them into our lives as we go about our lives. I had a best friend that passed away when I was 16. She was murdered. And so part of this has been about, like, what is her legacy that lives with me? And we both experienced a lot of, like, and that also around my identity, part of that was really to dig deep into my identity, because that was such a source of pain for us both. So part of her living on in me is me coming to terms with my identity. And so how do we keep people alive because we are still alive? And then to a larger point, a more systemic and generational perspective, grief is about something, right? It's about loss, it's about suffering. And for me, I try to keep everything in balance, which is to say that like the point of my activism is because for every person who's just told me that they just want to live their lives, like in a liberated world, I would be an actress, y'all, and probably a mediocre one. I would not be an activist because I would not be necessary in that way. So the point is that the point of grief is also about hope, and it's because that's its companion. So it's also about hope, and it's about this knowledge that we've lost something that we deserve, that we should have, and then to know what it feels like when we've reclaimed it. We've, I think, all shared stories about coming into our identities, and without the grief and the pain and the suffering, we would not have chosen those journeys to learn the joy of standing fully on this earth. And that is what we are doing as people, is to look for, we have grieved the people who pass away, the Trayvon Martins and the Tamir Rices. We grieve them because their loss shouldn't have been felt. But we know that there is hope that that will never happen again. And so I'm interested in the counterpoints, which are always joy, which is where I try to center my activism. We all deserve to be here and we deserve to thrive. And so that grief is knowing that that's not the way this is, that also propels us forward to pursue joy. That's where I would end that.
That was beautiful.
I'm going to actually attack this from more of a spiritual component, I think, than I will therapeutic. Because I think when we're talking about grief, there are just so many different versions of it. And I think that it's a challenging emotion to have, but it, like all those negative emotions that we experience besides like grief or like sadness or like isolation, they all tell us something. Like they all tell us a story. And so I think that from the human perspective, when we're missing or grieving, we're focusing a lot about what's not in front of us or what's not there. And so something that I found really powerful is just like from the spiritual component, when people pass over, is that the human part of us is what misses them. But like on a soul level, we still have the ability to connect with those people, and they're around us and they are with us at all times. But the difference is we might not be able to look at it or to hear it or to see it or to feel it because we're so longing and looking for the physical version of them to show up. And I feel like the more and more that I've been immersed or like have a different understanding of like mediumship and like from past loved ones to those who have passed, I've learned a lot about how when that passing happens, it's oftentimes this very beautiful thing. And it has helped me actually look at when someone passes away from a different perspective than it does when I look at it just from the, I miss them and I want them here. Mm-hmm. And then the moment that I can accept that they're not going to be here in that manner, I can have joy of have known them, having them impact my life in some way, or like just feel their presence. And an example of this I often see with people is they'll feel guilty about missing their person or thinking about them as if like the healing should be like linear, like they passed away, I grieved the loss of them, and then I moved on, and every day was a better day. But the reality is when we're grieving, it's going to look like this. And some days are going to be better than others. And the hope is that you're moving towards hope and love and light and connection with them. But it's not necessarily granted or automatic. And so like a year will go by or 2 years will go by, and they will be really mad that they're still like thinking of this person. But what I always like stress is like, you're focusing on the wrong part of it. You're seeing it as in what's wrong with me? Why am I still missing them? Versus saying, oh my goodness, this reminds me of them at this capacity. And this was so beautiful. This was a gift. So in that moment, I can actually feel their presence and experience that memory, because that part of them that was in me is still there as a gift. And oftentimes, like from a spiritual component, what you'll learn is when people speak with their like loved ones, that those moments happen as a gift to the person. Like, I'm here for you. I'm still with you all the time. You can communicate with me, because we can, like everyone has the gift to communicate with their loved ones. Some people are just more on and in tune to listening to like their messages and their signs and their love. And so perspective, like I said, I guess plays a huge role in this for me. But we're human, and that's what we all sign up to do, is to come here and have a human experience and work through things. And I've said this a few times, like I'm a late griever. So, you might pass away, and then 2 years later, I'm like, wait, they died? So I don't think there's this perfect path or plan. And I don't think this is just like the loss of like someone in physical form. I think that also happens with like when like we grieve parts of ourselves. Like, so in order for me to reclaim or to claim who I want to be in the future, or who I love myself to be in the now, I always say like a part of me died, right? I lost the old version of me, and that version of me was happy too, but they both can't exist. And so it's that sense of like, I could be grateful that she was once there to make this newer version of myself, or I can focus on other components of it. So
thank you. We have a question from online, and it says, as a young girl, I remember hating my darker skin and hid myself with long sleeves and pants. Now I know how silly it was. My question is, are there any steps besides reassurance to truly love oneself? As a brown woman, I still struggle with pushing intrusive thoughts away and feeling less than a person with wider complex.
I think a lot of that. So I used to hate my forehead because it's a giant Swedish forehead. And so I would always like cut my bangs this way, right? And a lot of that comes from, it feels like, because we internalize it, it feels like it's our voice. But those are really systems of oppression, especially when it comes to things like curly hair on Black women, or kinky hair on Black women, or darker skin, or it's this idea, especially for women, that we don't fit a beauty standard that literally like 0.5% of the population actually fits. And so it's about really identifying your inner voice and the voice of like internalized oppression, telling you that you're not good enough. Because like, if we stop and think about it, I am not a therapist, so Connie, please like be like, no. But all of the negative inner talk that I've ever felt about myself didn't come from me. I can now, like, when I think about it, it comes from internalized oppression. It comes from, Maria, you and I had this conversation where I laugh really loudly, and I got a lot of feedback from a lot of men in my younger 20s about how my laugh was annoying. And so I stifled it for a really long time. That's internalized oppression. That's literally the patriarchy telling me that I laugh too loud, I take up too much space. And so it chose I internalized that. And based on that internalization, I diminished myself. And so that's what it's really about, is teaching us to take up less space and to be less Black, to be less Indigenous, to be less Filipino, to be less of who we are. And any voice that tells you, whether it comes from what we think is inside or it comes from outside, anything that tells you to be less than what you are does not lead to personal or communal liberation. It is built to diminish you, and you deserve to thrive. And so any thought that you have that leads you down the path of diminishment and not thriving is a thought that needs to be banished and should be banished. And also to recognize that even in that, it's an imperfect process. There were quite a few times that I stifled my laughter even after I realized that it was a patriarchal notion that I was following. We're imperfect people, and the journey of unknowing and unlearning is imperfect. And I sit here and talk about, like, you deserve to thrive, and like I will also go home and drink a bottle of wine on a stressful night, knowing that that is not self-love at all. So again, allowing for the fact that it's a journey, and it's an imperfect journey, as Connie was talking about with grief. It's going to have ebbs and flows. You're going to be your best self some days, and you're going to be the version of yourself you want to send to therapy on some days too. And all of those things can exist in one imperfect and yet beautiful and meaningful and essential person.
Multitudes.
Multitudes.
I could say that too about growing up, being who I am, and I was taught somewhere along the way by, you know, people around me, you know, by society, by the media especially, you know, again about those standards of beauty, which had nothing to do with me. And so for me growing up, I felt like I was, you know, I always felt like I'm ugly. I don't fit that. I'm too tall. I'm too big. I'm, you know, on and on. I didn't fit that standard of beauty that I was seeing on TV or I was seeing in magazines. And then when I became more confident in who I am, I realized, you know, that is like all the oppression that we've been under, that we've received, to, you know, think of ourselves as less than, or as not beautiful, or as not intelligent, etc., on and on. And I thought, wow, you know, how come no one taught us to not take that on? You know, where was that? You know, and now those are the voices that I'm hearing now. That's the way I brought up my own daughters, you know, to not go by what you're seeing in the media. That has nothing to do with you. You are you, and the way you look and the way you are is, you know, totally beautiful. And I had to go back and look at old pictures of Omaha women. And when I looked at them, I thought, wow, they're really proud of themselves. They weren't like caught up in like that, you know, they didn't fit that standard of beauty. They were like, you know, their hair was a certain way, they held themselves in a certain way. And it was like, wow, that really reflects. It has nothing to do with their weight or, you know, anything that we're taught about how our bodies should look. They were like, this is who I am, and I'm very proud of who I am. And so that's where I began to unravel that, you know, that standard of, you know, what is beautiful. And then I was around Hawaiian women, and Hawaiian women that were just like, oh my gosh, the way they carried themselves and the self-love that they emanated and the love that they emanated to everyone. I was like, wow, how? So I had to ask, how do you, you know, how do you do that, you know? And that was something that they were raised with. So they weren't thinking again that, you know, they're about their size or about, you know, the color of their skin or their hair or anything. It was like they didn't see themselves as they didn't, you know, that they didn't fit into that westernized standard of beauty. They were like, I'm Hawaiian, this is who I am love, and I love you. And, you know, there was something that I was like, oh, wow, you know, I've got to, you know, process this and, redo my own thinking. And so once I did that too, I realized, I can be that way too. I can love myself and exude that same kind of aura, that same kind of love for everyone if I choose to do that. Because I'm undoing, again, that traumatic cycle. And I no longer have to live within that fear of, that I'm ugly or whatever that is, or I'm too dark, or, on and on. Because, I didn't want to be in the sun because I was going to get too dark. What the heck, And undoing that kind of thinking, it takes some time, but you can do it. I believe that.
I think that both of them describe that beautifully, so I don't want to necessarily talk about that, spend our time talking about that. With the whole confidence building component of it, one exercise that I share with people is there's something so powerful in seeing the image that you want to become. So the reality is there's no idea what real beauty is. And that real beauty, when it comes down to it, is that confidence, that essence, right? That we're all kind of talking about. So when you've decided for yourself what that looks like, what I would recommend to this person is like, choose that to reflect your like social media. And like, so what I did was I created my Instagram was like created to see more versions of myself. And so I followed accounts that would make me feel more empowered, where I would see Black women like succeeding, because the media is not going to necessarily give me that in the structure that I want it, because I want to see the multiple layers of that woman. I want to see her having fun and not having to like limit her fun and be successful. Or I want to like see my hair type and different versions of hair for my hair type, and I want it to be celebrated, because I said this to someone, what I would have given as a child to like,
Where'd she go?
Oh no,
We lost her.
I did have one more thing for like as personal advice that I was waiting for Connie to finish.
I know.
Okay, hopefully bring it back in here, but we'll hear yours.
Mine was really to also, I realized that I was able to list all of the things that I wasn't. I wasn't thin enough. I wasn't light enough, or I wasn't dark enough. My hair was not straight. I didn't get good enough grades. And when I tried to sit down and create an equal list of all the things that I am, that was so hard for me, because I think a lot of us are conditioned to think about what we are not, and to not think of what we are. And so when you define your identity in the negative space, you don't ever see anything but the shadow that you cast. And so, hi, Connie. So that, in addition to whatever Connie says next, my advice is really to sit down and think about all the things you are, and to make that list and to create affirmations around that, because we spend so much time thinking about what we are not that we sometimes forget all of the things that we are, and to celebrate those things.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
I was stalling for you to
you
get back.
want to tilt
Sorry,
your
I
screen
don't know
again.
what happened. Is it gone? Is it the way it was?
You're just
Little again?
yeah, you're little. We can't see your beautiful face.
Okay. Jeez, guys, this is exactly what I wanted to avoid.
It's fine. That works.
Okay.
It's not doing it. Well,
It's all right. Oh, yes.
there we go. So I will pick up from wherever you are. But long story short, I would have died to have that celebrated. The like commercials, you'd have that Dr. Miracle, and then it'd be like, Dr. Miracle, look at my nappy hair. And then like, I'll help you. And then the relaxer would go in, and then the woman would go on a date. So it was like the underlying subconscious like message that was sent was, okay, if you have straight hair, then you will find a man, and then you'll get married. And so it's like we actually internalize way more than we think when that commercial wasn't just about hair. It was subliminal marketing, because that's like marriage or like the pursuit of happiness, what people want. And so then you're going to be like, oh, in order to have this or to get that or to be happy, I have to want this. So what I would encourage that person to do is say, what would make me happy? What gives me joy? Like on a whole level, because I think honestly, it's unfortunate how much control, right, marketing and subliminal messages have. So I would recommend like meditating, say, what do I want? And then start filling your page with what it is that you want. And then you can start seeing it, because once you start seeing that confidence being poured into you, you can start like modeling it, because it becomes your perception of beauty and acceptance and confidence.
Yes.
You guys.
Yeah. Beautiful.
My heart is just so full. I always hate looking at the clock and being like, how has an hour and a half already passed? We just started. So I will wrap up this conversation part inspired by Connie with the question of, what are you guys deeply grateful for tonight?
I can go first because it came quick. I think what I'm grateful for, one, is the space and the present, like the time, because conversations like these aren't often met. And I think they're so important to have, because there is a sense of like normalization. And so I personally am really, I talk about this kind of stuff like all day long, but there are different perspectives and different views and different versions of grief and different versions of loss or oppression. And I'm not her story. I'm not her story. I'm not your story. And so, but at the same time, what you're saying speaks to me on a greater issue. And so I am thankful for you guys sharing parts of yourself with me, and that connection, that those parts of you also resonate with my spirit.
Thank you, Connie.
I think echoing Connie, it's just this idea of, especially right now, right, where we're all social distancing or physical distancing, just sitting in community. I think especially when we feel negatively, I think we tend to, and society teaches us to isolate ourselves. When realistically, when we know that other people feel the way that we do, there's a sense of healing that immediately starts. And so just being intentional and being authentic and vulnerable with 4 women of color during what is the most apocalyptic year of my life, just from what's happening out in the world, sharing a sense of community and sharing myself with you, and being able to hold as much energy in a Zoom meeting as we can together. That is what I'm grateful for. And that is a part of, I talk a lot about the future. I talk a lot about liberation, but things like this happening more frequently, to me, on a micro level, ripples out to the macro level, which is how we change systems, by being in community with each other, and sharing each other and sharing ourselves with each other in meaningful and scary and authentic ways. So that's what I'm grateful for.
Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah. I think I'm grateful every day that I wake up, and then I'm grateful for my children. Now my kids are, they're becoming adults now. And I feel like, in our belief system, we say that our children pick us, they pick their parents, So I'm always grateful that they chose me as their mother, that I brought them into the world. And I always feel like I had to do very little, in teaching them. It's like they came here already with so much knowledge. All I did was, I felt like all I ever did was, yes, I took care of them and I made sure they were, fed and warm and loved and everything. But all the other things, I feel like, they already had that. All I did was provide, their, what they needed, the materials, whatever. And they just went and did it. It was like, oh, wow. So I feel blessed in that way that, they are who they are, and they've been. I always tell them, they uh, they're the best companions I could ever have, had in my life. So I'm grateful for that. And each day, I think I'm just grateful for the people who are in my life, the ones that, that are, I guess you'd say, supportive and have said, I'm going to be here for you. I really feel that, and I appreciate that, because then in turn, it allows me to be there, in that sense for people, to continue to do the kind of work that I do. And I think, one thing I can share about like our traditional systems and how we do things, like especially in regards to grief, it's very formalized. If like say that, with the passing of my parents, for example, we went through the ceremony of uh, grieving. So we grieved. Like some of us grieved for a year, and then in that year's time, then we had what they call a wiping of the tears ceremony, which means now we can come out of our grief state and continue on with life. It's kind of like that's the kind of process that we've always had in place for our people, our families, so that did allow them that time to grieve and come to terms with that loss. And then once that grieving time was over, we marked it with that ceremony, and then they could carry on again, and people could welcome them back into the regular, lifestyle of, however that is, day-to-day living. And for me, that's how I look at everything that I do is like ceremony. So that's how I regard, my life. So even giving thanks, we have the Thanksgiving ceremonies, which has nothing to do with the annual Thanksgiving, in November. Has nothing to do with that. We can give thanks at any time. So that's what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thankful for you guys for being so vulnerable in this space with me and witnessing each other's grievances, and for all the traumas and patterns that I'm dealing with now. I am grateful for, because it's made me into the woman who I am today. And I think that once we can hopefully befriend ourselves in a loving and graceful way that we're able to do with others, we'll be able to do that even exponentially better out in the community. So I'm just so grateful for learning from all of you and all the other strong women, specifically right now in my life. I'm just thinking about my grandma Lola right now, because she has, like all of us, really been through the ringer of being like a 93-year-old Filipino woman who was 14 when World War II broke out. And so before this and leading up to this, I've just been chatting with her about what her experiences were, how she learned to deal with the grief of her mother passing right after World War II, like before they were even able to get back home. This is just me spitballing what I'm grateful for. But for all of you guys here who are witnessing everything with me and always open to learning, I will stop there and pass the mic over to Renee to share with us some poetry to close out the night.
Yes, I was thinking about which one should I read, and then I thought, well, okay, since we're talking about grief, I wrote this one several years back, and what it's about is, I had interviewed a number of Native women about their experiences of, again, about trauma, and got, a viewpoint of like, okay, now how would I turn this into a poem? And so I, took their words, and then I made it into a first person poem. So it's like me reciting the poem from my point of view, but really it's about their experiences, in addition to mine. So it's kind of like all these multiple voices that are being reflected in this poem. So this poem is called Breathing in the Here and Now. Each day as I awaken anew, grateful for this time that I'm living safely on this earth, our grandmother, breathing in the here and now. But I can look back in the years when I was young and every moment was a battle to survive. There were days and nights that often made little sense because I was drowning in the onslaught of degradation, praying for oblivion from any mind numbing substance. And I held together remnants of myself, seemingly with safety pins and duct tape, old standbys even for the soul. There were no boundaries respected. How could there be when all that we once believed in as a people was torn away with little regard for our humanity? No thought was ever given for the consequences that all our generations have paid for in blood. The rapes began with our nations first, our lands, our spirits, our minds, and our dignity were stripped away like so much bark from the fallen trees. This violent legacy continued on unchecked, unstoppable, and was passed down from generation to generation in lateral degrees, like unwanted heirlooms hidden away in shame. Shame, because of the shame, a code was maintained while innocence was blamed, and silence reigned under more threats of injury that was held over my head like an executioner's blade. Who was there to hear my screams anyway, when any protest I made was looked upon in mute agony shared by us all? Is there anything akin to rage and despair? They are familiar friends in impossible moments such as this, a deadly combination that requires complete darkness, and all the while I danced as my spirit caved in on itself. I swirled with bright blue lights down into midnight, where I lay in an abyss of being that had never felt the day. At last, I thought, with a shiver of relief, I found an escape from the pain and the question that plays over and over and over, relentlessly asking, do I matter to anyone in this life? There were no responses to this non-rhetorical question that caused me such misery just for its very existence. But my answer came slowly when my eyes blinked open and the realization that I was still alive confronted me. In this hospital room where my tears ran like the river Nishude, unrecognizable to anyone who didn't share the sight. Doctors came and went in my room. Then a therapist arrived along with a social worker, and they began to ask why I tried to take my own life. Wasn't I doing well in school? What was my home situation like? Was there abuse? I turned away from their probing questions, cutting into me like utility knives. Then I lay in solitude for some time under lock and key, where solutions to my problems were being discussed between all interested parties and others who held a stake in my life. All I wanted to do was go back to sleep. Return to your life now and get what you need, echoed this voice clearly into my left ear. Washkan, you're going to be all right. I knew that there was no one else in my room, and only one person in this world ever spoke that way. She was my auntie, who used to always take care of me before all the desolation and destruction entered my world. In that moment, I realized that love exists in any time and can heal you like it healed me if you allow it to. With that new understanding in mind, I made the decision to step back onto the path of life, knowing that my journey is just beginning, that good health and happiness exists in every breath, but only if I want it to, when I breathe. breathing in the here and now.
That was so beautiful. Thank you for sharing with us.
You're
Do you
welcome.
have any other ones you want to share?
I've got some that aren't as long and some that are really short. I can read this one that I wrote within the last year. I've got other ones that I also wrote more recent, but this one I think is applicable to the work that I've taken on. It's called Where Do They Go? And it's about the missing and murdered Indigenous women. I'm wearing a t-shirt for MMIW, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women of Nebraska. And you can see that this artwork here is done by one of our Native sisters, Valerie Copeland, so I'm giving her a shout out. And this work that we've taken on is to help in this movement. And this poem is about that. Where do they go? The missing and the murdered. Ancestral Road, Ghost Road, Milky Way. They are like stardust, but do they wait or dance or sing? They need our help. My heart said so, as spirits lead us beyond red earth and sky. So let us feast them. Get your tobacco, get your pipes, get your drums. Where do they go, the missing and the murdered? Hear their voices, which we sound in silence no more. So this is dedicated for the beloved daughters, mothers, aunties, grandmothers, granddaughters, nieces, wives, and friends who have gone missing or who have been murdered.
Thank you so much for sharing your art with us, and to all of you, your vulnerable, authentic wisdom. I'm so lucky to be in this position and to be able to continue to learn from such influential people in our community here in Nebraska. I feel lighter already. I feel like I can't wait to go back and rewatch all of this and then really be scribbling down all my notes from it. So thank you again to everybody who tuned in on Twitch. If you guys missed it, or if you want to pass this on to a friend who you think would benefit from it, you'll be able to find it on YouTube in the next 48 hours. We'll get it up for you. But that's all we have for tonight. Thanks for hanging in there. I'm like, yeah, we'll keep it to an hour and a half, and then 2 hours later, we still haven't talked about everything. So thank you guys so much. We will see you next time.
Thank you for having us. Yes, thank you.
Right.